For many people with ADHD, the world seems designed to highlight their struggles rather than their strengths. But what if we stopped looking at ADHD as a flaw that you have to fix, but a unique way of thinking that when you understand it could actually become a powerful tool? And today's guest is here to discuss how he's learned to work with his ADHD, the relationship between the education system and those who think differently, and how embracing that creativity that we have can unlock our potential. So this is going to be a conversation about self-acceptance, adapting to your own strengths, and learning to live in this world that wasn't really built for every kind of mind. My name's Aaron.
My name's Cass.
And this is Fuck the Plan. And today we are very happy to welcome to the show Daniel Lee White. Daniel, please introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I am got about 25 years doing theater and film. Ooh, speaking on these things. So sorry.
Yeah, get the jitters out. Let's shake it out.
Yeah, you were my first podcast ever. So that's where this is all kind of fun. You know,
Very
you
cool.
Pick yourself up.
We're honored. No pressure.
So I've been in about the theater and film industry for about 25 years. And I've also been in the theater education for about another 10 years for arts education. Got an MFA in comedy of all things and a bachelor's in communications.
So does that mean that you're certified hilarious if you have an MFA in comedy?
I can certifiably understand it, dissect it, and help others, perhaps.
That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
And so, you've talked about arts education, and, you know, I know for myself, I won't speak for Cass, but for myself, some of my arts educators when I was younger have really huge roles to play in my overall philosophy in life that I took away, you know, especially at a young age, being involved in a music program and things like that. So tell us a little bit about, you know, what you do as an arts educator. What's some specifics of kind of your roles these days? You know, what your day-to-day is like?
Sure. So I did that for about 7 years. I was a theater artist in residence at a charter school in Providence, Rhode Island. I actually backed into education. Being in film and theater, you probably know the gigs are few and far between. You get a gig and you work like crazy for 8 weeks, and then you're out of a job for a couple months. Then you work for 6 months straight like crazy, and then you're out of work for another 6 months.
Yep.
A friend of mine told me about substitute teaching. And I was like, what is this? And they're like, yeah, no, it's super easy. You go in, you do your thing. So I went in and started doing that and found out I was actually really good at it, which was strange for me. Educator was not something that ever, piqued my interest. But as a sub, I had maintained an ability to control the classroom, which worked. So, most kids hear, oh, it's a sub. And the students would, get excited. Then they'd see me walk in, they go, aw, and then silence.
Yeah.
But we had built a rapport. They knew what to expect from me. And I have to say, this is the first time for me, my ADHD actually ended up coming in handy in that scenario, because as a sub, you're just watching the classroom. So I'd often bring in other work to do. I was working on lines, or I was working on some script thing, or I was working on some element. So I'd sit there with my computer, but I could also still catch them what they were doing and be on top of them, because you have to. It's just management. But you could just be like, hey, let's get focused. Let's do that. Let's do this. And so that's when I kind of realized, I was like, oh, this is really helpful, because I already use that ADHD element within my career. I'll get into that some more. But
because you described that as like not only a reason for a lot of your struggles, but a lot of your success too. And it's funny how there's two sides of that coin. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah. In film or in theater, you got to pay attention to everything that's going on at the same time. So when I was filming something, I'm watching the script supervisor, I'm watching the actors, I'm watching the background people, I'm seeing what costumes going on, but I'm doing that, processing that all at the same time inside my head. And it's like reaching around and grabbing everything. And when I don't have that ability, it actually messes me up. So when I was subbing, I could control the classroom and do my work. But one time I got prescribed Adderall. Sure, we're all familiar with that wonderful thing.
We are.
No, what's that?
And so I took it, and that day I got more work done on my computer than I ever had. And I remember really being focused, and I looked up, and one of the TAs had walked in the room and she's staring at me. And I'm like, what's the matter? And I looked at the classroom. Kids were on the table. They were throwing papers. I had completely lost my ability. I was like, I'm going to get fired if I do this.
It's almost like an overcorrection, right? Like the pendulum
Yeah,
swings all the way further to the opposite side, which is funny, a
yeah,
topic that just came up in the
We,
last
yeah, we
recording
literally
were
use
doing,
those exact words.
but it's crazy how that works, you know. And the first time I took Adderall, I was like, holy shit, you mean normal people just think like this all the time? Like, this is just how your brains work? But then over time, the more I took it, the more I realized, like, maybe this is taking it a little too far, and now I'm losing some of these things that I actually had as benefits or strengths.
I think you just said something that's kind of the crux of my thinking. You said this is how normal people think. And that generally has run into my issue when I look at ADHD,
Yeah.
especially when I looked at education with my students. We'll take something simple as people who are left-handed.
Mm-hmm.
How long through life can people who are left-handed be considered wrong? Oh, you're doing this wrong. You were incorrect. You were wrong. And they literally beat it out of some people
Yeah.
through education. But there's nothing wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, do we look at this like there's something wrong with us when really there is nothing wrong with us?
That's
And
true.
I'm going to jump right into one of the things that I find important, the Superman idea. And I know
Right.
on one of your previous episodes, Cass got into this a little bit, Superman, X-Men. And it's interesting
Right.
to move on that idea.
If I could just remind the audience, so our, ADHD, a blessing or a curse, superpower or not episode where we discussed, how it's kind of become a touchy subject among the ADHD community to refer to your ADHD as a superpower, because there are really crippling, debilitating parts of this that make it very difficult to live a sort of typical life in our society. But then there's also parts of it where we are way more gifted in certain ways that our neurotypical peers are not. So there's a lot of discourse and discussion in this community about whether it should be considered a strength or a detriment, or where the balance is in calling it a superpower, quote unquote. I know that's more of a buzzword, but just to remind the audience of that, previous discussion we're referencing here.
Yep. And I use the superpower not as to tell someone they have a superpower, but as a reference to help you understand where I'm coming from. So if I'm somebody's like, well, he thinks it's a superpower, I'm out, checked out, no good. Bear with me on the thought. We take Superman as a for instance. We know how great he seems.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, when you read the lore, when he first got all these abilities, it overwhelmed him. He could hear everything in the entire world all at the same time. It was too much for him. When he could close his eyes and he could still see, it drove him over. And there's a movie, I think it's called Bright, where it takes, hey, what if Superman had not gone the path of good? What if he had gone the path of evil? It's a horror film, I think, by James Gunn, or James Gunn was involved in it.
Oh.
He had these abilities, and he learned how to use them to help himself. But we're going to, people call them, they're superpowers. I mean, he also breaks the lore because he's the only one. Every other superhero puts on their outfit to become their alter ego. Superman's the only one that puts on his outfit to become a normal person.
Right.
So his alter ego is Clark Kent.
Right.
And so he took all those abilities and had to work to be normal. Right. And you take it X-Men, like you were bringing up, Cass, where you have all these people with abilities, but they're treated differently and given things to help them cope through that. And so I think that's where some people get that, like, oh, I need coping to help get there. But we keep talking about what is normality.
Right.
It doesn't really exist. It's whatever society tells us is normal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, we often tend to compare it to like culture or society when we think normal, you know what I mean?
Social media has only made that worse.
Right, right. And I do, and I'm glad I slipped on this one. I do often try and refer to, non-ADHD or something like as neurotypical rather than normal. But I'm glad I slipped and said normal because I like this discussion that we're having about it. Because basically, we have to realize that whether it's ADHD or something else, everybody's different and
Mhm.
everyone's brain operates differently. Some folks have anxiety, some folks are autistic or have an autism spectrum disorder, some folks have ADHD and some folks don't. Some people wake up in the morning and neurologically their brain fires, as intended, so to speak.
That
um,
doesn't sound real to me, Aaron.
uh, I've
Mm.
met one or two of these people in my life, and it's very weird to try and have a conversation with them because I'm very weird. But in any event, it's funny, and I think it is a good comparison, especially with comparing Superman versus X-Men, because we see how society treats the different sort of marginalized groups or those who are different from what they're used to seeing. And in one way, when there's mystery involved, when there's, ooh, who's this Superman guy who's all of a sudden fixing the world, everybody sees it as a positive. But when you see, Rogue or Gambit or any of the X-Men, you're like, get that fucking weirdo out of here. Put him in a school in the hills somewhere with that other weirdo in the wheelchair and get them out of my sight. They're looked at as mutants and like not normal. And it's all because of the way society views them. And it's funny that you have this sort of, dichotomy and art representing life. We see this in the real world too. You know what I mean?
Well,
We
look
see.
at like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I think is a perfect example of this.
Oh, I love this.
Red-nosed fucking freak, get the fuck out of here. Oh, you can help us, you're our hero. And I think
Yeah,
that is exactly how society treats things like this.
yeah. It.
Until somebody with ADHD becomes prominent and helps someone make money or be more productive, it's gonna be vilified, and because it's easier to vilify than to try to understand it.
Yeah, and the problem is there are a lot of people out there doing that. And
Mhm.
so it's just funny to me. So,
I think a lot more people have ADHD and other neurodivergent um, parts of themselves than let on.
yeah.
And so you say, well, until one of them helps save, they probably have. And I wonder if people take the mindset of, what if normal was neurodivergent?
Yeah.
How would the other group feel? Like, oh, I'm so weird because I only think linearly.
Linearly, I think
I
so.
I
think
only think in a straight line, and how could you possibly think about all these things at the same time? I need to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's where education runs it amok, because each of these individuals are seen as, well, you don't do it like everyone else, so you do
Right.
it wrong.
And it's funny how arbitrary that everyone else group is
Mhm.
because it all depends on what's popular and what's in
Yeah.
fashion at the moment. At times it was very different. In many, many years ago when, the world wars were happening, we saw people who needed to be, strict and disciplined and on the straight and narrow, and like these big sort of macho, I'm going to handle it type of people became the popular normal
Mhm.
thing. You know what I mean? And then as things progressed years later into the 60s and 70s and the counterculture started arising, people started saying, hey, what about the rest of us? And started showing technical abilities. And then suddenly, fast forward all these years later, now being smart and technologically savvy and being able to start an app or something like that is what's looked at as desirable. Like, it's not so much the physical things as it was. So it's crazy how all of these differences have existed. And the main difference is how popular one or the other has been over time.
hmm
I say the geeks and nerds have finally taken over the world, or so to speak.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, things that I was bullied for in school are now popular. And now I'm like, well, where was this 15 fucking years ago, huh?
But I think, again, I know it's a tough mindset to ground. A lot of those people who machismo and you think are on the straight and narrow are just really good at masking.
Yeah.
I mean,
or really bad, because sometimes
or,
it sticks out, and you're like, if
Yes.
you were secure in yourself, you wouldn't have to constantly remind people
yeah. Well,
of.
what do they say about insecurity, right? If you don't have, uh, um, if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're a narcissist.
I
So,
think that's
like,
right.
everyone has it. Everyone wonders, oh God, I'm weird, and they're gonna figure out I'm weird, and so I'm gonna put on this face. And we often don't see it in others because we are so focused on ourselves.
Right.
We're looking at everybody else must be normal. I must be weird. Where if we took a moment, we might find, hey, a lot more people are like me than I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, your podcast clearly very popular. Lots of people as guests. Lots of people listening to it because those are lots of people out there who identify. And if there are lots of them, are they so different,
No.
or are they all the same and we're just realizing it?
And
Yeah.
they tend to be easier to find in certain circles. All three of us are involved with or have been involved with the arts in some way.
Mhm.
We're lucky because our communities, people tend to be more open about it, I think. And there's also a certain type of brain that flocks to these different activities, music, acting, comedy. These tend to be very open art forms. People tend to just like leave it all out there and they get to talk about things or joke about things that normally people don't, talk about or express. And I think it's easier for us to connect. But, Aaron, you and I in the corporate world, we saw how desperately people want to hide all of that in different
Yes.
settings. And we almost get spoiled in the arts world.
Where people are so open about it. Yeah. And
Hmm.
I think there's when you are an adult who stays involved in the arts and things like that, because everybody sees it a little bit as a child, right? Everybody's exposed to it. That's just part of life, is singing silly songs or dancing around. And when you realize at some point that this has value to me, just personally, not because it's tied to any sort of typical success, like a career type of thing. When you say my art and my expression has value to me because it helps me and helps others, those sorts of people are often those who have had negative experiences in the past and who have flocked to that as a sort of comfort and said, like, this is an area where it's very clear to me that people are expressing their authentic selves and they're not having to hide who they are. And the people who stick with that further and further into adulthood and don't lose that little scrap of sort of authenticity that they have are the ones who continue to put an importance on it and prioritize it because they realize the value. And I think societally, we don't put enough value on that. But then everybody wants to sit around and watch Netflix for 6 hours a day. It's like, well, who's going to make the fucking movies on Netflix if nobody sticks with that? You know what I mean? I just think it's so funny how, as a society, we often lie to ourselves or push things away because we feel like there's different priorities. But in reality, you don't realize how big of priority those things are, and you're staring right at it when you're watching Netflix or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's an odd sort of blinder to be wearing.
The thing I did learn through teaching theater education is that it gives people an outlet to express themselves. And I think we say, well, we have a lot of these folks who are in there, but if you also look, there are other marginalized communities that are in there. I think of the LGBTQAI community. There's a lot of them there too. But again, then that poses the question, are there a lot of these individuals there, or is it a place that we are able to express? And there are a lot more out there who feel they must hide that. They must take medicine to get there, get therapy to fix themselves, change those. So we're vocal, but the students that were in there loved it because it's like they were full of so much either passion or rage or pain or whatever, and it gave them a place to express themselves. So I
Right.
think that's why we find a lot of people like that. But I agree with you, play is the most important part. When I perform, I think to myself, people paid money to see me act like a child.
Yeah.
This is the best profession ever.
Right? That's awesome. And it's like, I think there's a lot of lessons to learn from that too. From theater, from improv, from comedy. There's a lot of lessons that you can learn, not just about others, but about yourself, about managing your own sort of brain waves and what you've got going on, for lack of a better term. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've learned, not just as far as, yes, include as far as your ADHD, but also just about yourself in general?
I think life takes time to help you discover yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had talked to me 10 years, I definitely would not have had this mindset 10 years ago. I,
Right.
Still be trying to control everything, still be trying to get a hang of it. And it's something you learn to take advantage of what was given to you.
Mm-hmm.
I could let it hold me down, and that's perfectly possible. I've chosen to say, well, I want to get ahead. and it's with me. It's a part of me. I can't get rid of it. I can't cut it out of me. So I'm going to use it to help me.
Yeah.
And I
That
found the
acceptance,
places it's good.
that self-acceptance is so important. And I don't think people put enough value on it because, to be honest, I don't think they even realize. You know what I mean?
And I warn them that tomorrow I could lose all of that self-acceptance all over again. Someone's
Yeah.
like, oh, well, I'm not quite accepting me. Every day, every minute, you can choose to accept yourself. And the next minute, you could lose all of that with a comment that threw you awry.
It's an active thing. It's not passive.
Yeah.
It's not a one and done.
Let yourself be okay with making mistakes and messing up,
Yeah.
because that's how you're going to keep learning.
Yeah, that's a big part of my own personal philosophy too. Is learning through those things. And you know, I don't know that I've talked about it on the show. This big tattoo I have on my arm, it says, "We are not our failures." And there are so many times that I have failed over and over and over again in my life. It's the one thing I do best, to be honest. But I have also learned so much from that. And had I not failed at these things in the past, I wouldn't have learned those lessons and been able to be, you know, where I am today with certain things. And by God, I am not perfect. I'm not even close. But I do see that I have learned a lot from these times that I've made mistakes and messed up. And at a certain point in my life, I realized that's really the only thing we can do is continue to learn and push forward. And I'm not good at it. I'll put it out there. You know what I mean? I'm not always good at it, but all you can do is try and work towards it, because you've got to realize that going backwards is not the way. And I do go backwards some days, of course, but you have to, when you have that realization, make those steps forward and continue, because that's, I think, really all there is to life. You know, a lot of times I feel like the only thing that we can control is our own actions and responses to things. And we can let it get us down, or we can let it push us in the right direction.
Failure is the only free education in this country.
Oh, yeah.
And
Except YouTube, I have to say. I learned how to fix my heating system on YouTube for free, and that was really awesome.
fair, you can learn some stuff you don't want to learn on YouTube though.
So
yeah, no,
I think that brings us back to the education system. While we've learned that from life,
right.
it's never taught to the youth.
No.
You're taught, well, you didn't do it the right way, so you are wrong, and all you can do is learn how to do it the right way. Where if we were open to different styles of learning, it would be easier for someone to feel, I'm not a failure, I'm just learning how to do this.
Yeah.
We already have that. We have, visual learners and tactile learners and audible learners, and so those systems are already in place, but they're not ready to expand to the idea of like, hey, Billy, you're going to learn by memorizing these times tables, and Sally over here is going to learn, hey, you're going to learn how to approach it from multiple different areas, because that seems to be working better for you. The way one performer memorizes a monologue versus another are incredibly different, but we're taught in many different theater classes are like, this is how you memorize. Is it?
Yeah.
Or is it what works for you?
That's true. And I've seen a little bit, just being in the corporate world for a while, that a lot of our, at the corporate level, training programs are starting to move towards that, because I think they are seeing that if you want people to learn the information, the most important thing is to help them learn the information, not to make them do XYZ task. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, when it comes to the earlier education systems, do you have any insight on whether the resistance to that is more sort of philosophical based, they're not sure that it will work, or is it more logistics based, like we just don't have the staff and the skills to do that?
It's why I bring it back to the left-handed. How many years did it take them to figure out the people who are left-handed were not wrong? We're not different. It takes systems too long to make these understandings and be willing to change, because no one else wants to be seen as wrong. We're afraid to be wrong. We're afraid to fail. And so the education system's like, no, we're right. And we're never going to change, because change is scary and change is bad. So this adjustment, it's going to take time. It's going to take voice. It's going to take some scientists to do some studying. I can have all the opinions I want. Am I right about everything? Heck no. I might be completely off base. Somebody might have listened to something here and be like, that guy is nuts. He's wrong. He's just wrong. And I'm like, cool. I mean, this is where I've gotten to. And I have different learning styles with me. Do you use anybody here use the Pomodoro technique?
I do. I do it when I'm working a lot, or I'll do it when I'm, like doing chores, things around the house all the time.
All right, so your listeners are familiar with that then. So
Yeah, yeah.
I
As a
would
quick
explain it
reminder,
anyway because, quite frankly, I probably know what it is, but not by name.
right?
all right,
So we
the
talked
name
about
is
this.
really
Just
silly.
for a quick, I'm sorry, I'll quit interrupting. But listeners, if you go back to the um, getting advice from neurotypical folks episode, there is some info on there. But I'll also let
Oh, that was an old one.
Daniel
Yeah.
kind of explain it for the current listeners.
So for me, the way it works, so you break things into chunks, but it makes you kind of push through. So I do 25 minutes of work, take a 5 minute break, do another 25, take a 5 minute break, do that in a series of four normally, and then you take a 25-minute break. And what it does is it allows you to be like, hey, okay, I can get up, I can walk away, but I know in 5 minutes I have to be back. And while I'm working, I'm like, oh, I want to let my mind go for it. I'm like, no, I'm giving myself permission to do that in a little later. I don't know how much more time. I'm going to stay working. Now, I also have a little bit of OCD, so I actually do five.
Mm-hmm.
So I do 5 Pomodoros because I use them as tick marks. So every time I
You
complete
get the
one, I
slash.
tick mark, and it feels really good to slash across.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, I need five of these. And then I take that 25-minute break. And for me, it keeps me in front of the computer, but I also know that I can pace for 5 minutes. I can't stand still.
Yeah.
For anybody who's watching the video version, I am not sitting right now. I can't do it. It wouldn't function. So I move. It's how I work. But that's a system. And I get the Pomodoro only came from it was a guy who in the 90s created it, and he used the timer as a tomato kitchen timer that he had on his stove.
Oh, like
So
the
he
kind that you
called,
twist. It
yeah,
looks like a
and it was a
tomato.
tomato, so he called it the
Uh,
Pomodoro technique. There is
I
no,
always wondered
Ah.
why, but
yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, nothing special, no crazy thing. He's like, what do I call this? Tomato. It's the
There we go.
tomato technique. So,
It's
but
funny how when you put something into Italian or a different language, it all of a sudden sounds fancier. It's like if you called it the tomato method, everybody would be like, "Nah, I don't really like tomatoes." But you call it Pomodoro, all of a sudden it's like some groundbreaking technique.
yep, yeah. But I mean that works, and then each one you got to work for you. It helps me to pay attention to multiple things. I get more done that way. And
Yeah.
when I took that Adderall, I could not function. Does that mean I'm not normal? Or does that mean I'm not fitting into the society of normative, what we call the normative world? Am I left handed and I don't feel like I'm correct because I'm not writing with my right hand?
Right.
Am I somebody who doodles on my notebook and somebody's like, you're not paying attention, when actually doodling on the notebook is exactly what's helping them pay attention?
Yeah, and I think there's got to be an understanding of that. I think there oftentimes is a tunnel vision type of view. These days, like, again, I'm not a teacher or educator, so I'm going based on discussions I've had with other folks. But you've got specific targets and goals that you need people to learn, and you say, all right, what's the most efficient way to do this so I can preserve my own time and brain space, and how can I get the most people to understand with the least amount of work on my part? And I get it. That's how a job works, right? If teaching is your profession, just like my profession is operations in the corporate world, I see what's the most efficient way to do this. But the reality is we live in the real world, not on paper. A lesson plan exists on paper. People exist in the real world. So we've got to
Mm-hmm.
find ways that reach those who aren't going to be able to follow along with what works for the majority. And yes, there's things in common, and yes, there are adaptations that some of us will need to make. But at the same time, like, what changes are necessary to create a more inclusive environment? What changes, and Daniel, I'd ask your opinion on it. What do you think is needed to create that more effective learning environment for everybody, not just neurotypical or neurodivergent?
It's being okay with acceptance and changing the norm. We talked earlier about how the short of the LGBT community um, is involved in theater, and we asked, well, why? What's it going to take to help? These folks advance on the stuff. We can't get people to accept that LGBT people are humans and that they are normal.
Yeah.
So this is why we also can't get people who are neurodivergent for the people to accept that that's normal. And maybe we just need to open our eyes that people are different and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying these two groups are just like each other. I'm saying is these two groups are handled the same way. You're different. You're strange. I don't like you, so I can't accept you. And so what needs to change in the world is kind of what's been happening, a slow progression towards understanding, knowledge, forward movement, forward thinking. And everything is a little bit like a pendulum. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Right.
And we're going to keep doing that slowly. And we're never going to be able to walk in and say, everybody in this corporation, you now need to understand neurodivergent people. And everyone's going to turn their heads on and be like, hey, that guy over there needs to work for 3 hours and then take a break for 2. And that's fine. And I'm okay working here for a straight 8 hours. There's not a switch that's going to happen. We have to keep learning. We have to keep advancing. So until everyone who, I hate this word, who is different in any functional society sort of way is accepted as that's who you are, that is your superpower. It's not just to neurodivergent. It's to everything. That's who you are. Your superpower is who you are. Superman is who he is, but we're going to call it a superpower. No, his superpower is being normal.
Yeah.
That is Superman's superpower. And that's where sometimes get into this like, oh, well, ADHD is your superpower. Is it? Or is it who you are? And your superpower is if you can get your ADHD to fit within society and function forward. And there are
Right.
people out there who are doing that, who are the people who are advancing, our lives. And we may not like all of them. There may be a certain one making great advancements in space and electric travel who drive us absolutely mad. But these people are dealing within the same world that we are. And they
Yeah.
found a way to make it work for them.
I totally get that. And, it's funny that you mentioned that specific person, because if you look at that level of things where you have these sort of forefront of the current society type of entrepreneurial folks, sort of people who like to lead the charge of change, there's almost a 100% track record of them being neurodivergent. We're almost the only ones who do these things on the big level, because we're the only ones stupid enough to believe that we can figure it out, right? Like, we're the only ones who haven't been conditioned by society to say, oh, well, I'm not this or I'm not that or that's for someone else. We're the only ones dumb enough to believe we can do it, and so we fucking do it, right? And we go forward and we take these steps that most people would say that's too risky, that's silly, that's nothing that's ever going to turn into anything, and they clock in at 9, clock out at 5, and live for the weekends, and that's cool if that's what you want to do. But if you want to make a change in the world, you've got to be dumb enough to try. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be dumb enough to not listen to what people are saying about how you can't, or how X group of people can't do these things. And, I'm obviously joking to an extent about being stupid enough about it, but at the same time, a lot of times I see this where somebody who doesn't know the rules all of a sudden changes things in an industry because they don't know how things are supposed to work. Mm-hmm. So when I was in a position of hiring folks at my previous company that I worked at, I didn't really care if they had the technical product or informational knowledge. What I cared about is, do you want to learn, and will you take the steps that are necessary regardless of whether that's what you're supposed to do? Are you ready to learn what it takes, rather than say like, well, I think I know this is what it takes and I'm going to go and try and do that? Are you ready to learn what it really means to have success in a certain thing without bringing any prior judgments into it? And I don't think people realize that enough.
I think that is a great thing, because I am living proof of the fact that you can know your shit and not be good.
Yeah.
Like, as a financial advisor, I was a shitbird investment advisor, man. Like, I sucked, but I passed all the tests and I knew it. I just didn't care. It's so much better to have somebody who cares and is willing to learn than somebody who already knows all their shit and doesn't care.
Right. Well, and then on the other hand, you were not like this, but then there's also people who feel like, well, what can you teach me that I don't already know? It's like, if you're that closed off, then you're the one slipping backwards and not making any progress, because how can you learn anything if you already know it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's what it needs. The question is how many of us who fall within these systems can take the moment to care about someone else and how we can help them. As we often get torn up in ourselves and how are we dealing with this? But so many other people are going through that same thing and being told they're wrong. And if instead we found a way to say, how can I help someone else? How does fuck the plan help other people? You help other people by making them feel like there's a community they belong to. And that's you making the difference to help. We think it's like, how do we make the difference to change things? Help someone else, help educate, help be compassionate, help them through it, tell them they're not wrong. Tell them that we can work together to get through this. We talk about a lot of people who will jump out there. Some of us are the ones who are told, you can't do this. That is not how you do it. This, you cannot do this. And we're the type of people went, hold my beer or hold my non-alcoholic beverage in my,
Yeah.
like, just, we're going to prove you wrong. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of the people that told you can't do that. And they went, you know what? This is too hard. Fine. That's cool. I'm going to go to work, 9 to 5. I'm going to do this. I implore, we think about what is normal, but it's a thing we were told. I really feel like a majority of the population is not what we would consider normal.
Mm-hmm.
But because those who speak are louder, we start to think that there are. And I think the more we share, the more we help teach, the more we express, the more we're finding. What's TikTok been doing?
Right.
TikTok is revealing to the world, wait, there are people out here that are just like me. And it's something that's like, oh, more and more people are coming out to be neurodivergent or autistic. Are they? Or were they always there throughout history and we just didn't know how to address it? We didn't realize they had a community.
Yeah, like your strange uncle who's lived in the same place and never married for like 40 years and has a $800,000 model train collection in the basement. I'm telling you, he's one of us. Like that has existed for a very long time, and I think since the communication and the visibility of a lot of things is much more out in the open these days, it's much easier for people to see and relate to that, and we're being brought closer together, not even just in this country but all over the world. Like every day there's more globalized sharing of information than there ever has been in the past. And having this information out there, to your point, makes it so people realize they're not alone. They're not the only ones in this. And that gets easier over time because, we are more connected than we ever have been in the past. And I think there are a lot of folks who have been closed off to that and don't see this progression, and they like to be in their own little world because they feel safe in that, but aren't realizing that this is a benefit, that there's more different people than you, not a negative thing. We made a reference a couple episodes ago where it's like certain people have different strengths for different things. I drive a stick shift car. My wife does not. Why would we get up in the morning and take each other's cars? We wouldn't. She wouldn't get to work. I take my car, she takes hers. So why would I be trying to do things that I know there's other people better than me at? I want to do what I'm good at, and you do what you're good at. And I think these differences among us are only going to enhance what we as a society can get done. It's not going to take away from it because I can't do something. It's going to add to it because I found somebody who could.
We can bring it back to the nerdy world again. In the Lord of the Rings movies, when Legolas and Gimli are running, and Gimli's like, and Legolas is like far ahead of him, and Gimli says something like, "We dwarves are wasted on cross country." Like that. I used to say that to an ex who was like super tall and like ran marathons. Was I faster than him? Yes. Would I give up before I hit 26 miles? Yes.
Yep.
And he's built for distance and running like long times because he's got the thin body and the long legs.
Yeah.
I'm shorter and I have the thicker muscular legs. I'm not going to keep carrying myself that long, but you put me in a dash, I'm in it.
Yeah.
And it's that thing.
What if someone in the education system told him, well, you're running too long. So you're actually not normal. You should probably run shorter distances like everyone else. You're doing this wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
we just keep coming back to that. If people in the educational system would be more open to different learning styles, it's amazing what they could accomplish. My students, I let them do things outside of the norm. They still had the same expectations, but they were allowed different ways to do it. So if this young lady would like to sit under her desk and work for the class, but the work got done, that was what she was allowed to do. And, somebody said, well, I want to lay under my desk. Does that help you, or are you going to get distracted? Oh,
Yeah.
that doesn't actually help me. Well, then that's not your thing. And I didn't call them out for it. Each one had their thing. There were a couple individuals who talking worked for them and they got all their work done. So I was like, all right, well, you guys are just going to take the back corner. Not for any other reason, then you won't distract for people who can't learn like that.
Yeah.
And so we need to let people learn the way they learn and tell them they're not wrong. You're not. I like the term better that's coming out now, which is the differently abled learners. People are not in special education. They're not, disabled. They're differently abled learners. And we need to we need to help them figure out how they learn best by trying different techniques and doing different things. And I think if we did, we'd have a lot more innovators. We might have a lot more people in theater. I don't know. But your corporate world would be very different if you walked by someone's desk and they were under the desk coming up with financial advice for their client.
Right.
And then Cass would not be sitting there going, I'm terrible at this. Were you terrible at it, or were you terrible at doing it the way they did it?
Yeah. And I
I
mean,
just
I know
didn't
it's a
care. That was the issue.
that's true. I know it's a small thing, but it's a sort of a microcosm of it. I've noticed standing desks are a thing now. So all of a sudden, we have these desks that move
Look at you,
upwards,
Daniel.
and you can stand and work. And it's like, why can we realize that? Okay, John's back bugs him after 4 hours of working, so he's got to stand up. Why can we realize that okay, it's visible, it's a physical thing, but we can't have that same empathy towards the mental or internal challenges to those things. And so like that kind of brings me to my last question that I really had is your approach to ADHD and education reform and the ideas that you have, I think make a lot of sense. And what would be any sort of final thoughts or sort of like maybe a guiding principle to bring this together that would help other people start to be more accommodating or start to realize where that mindset shift is? What's something where you can kind of put in and say, like, if you're an educator, this is where you should start thinking about it, or how you should start thinking about it.
I think I want to approach this kind of wrapping it up. I think the term we got scared of at the beginning of this is saying that somebody has a superpower. When we're actually looking at Superman had an ability, not a superpower. He just needed to figure out how to use it. Everyone out there, neurodivergent or not, you have an ability. You were given abilities. You grew up and created abilities to survive your environment, whether that was a harsh environment or an easy environment. There are things that you developed over time or that were developed in your progression of growth. And you have to figure out how are those abilities going to help you. And the educational system has to allow for that. It has to help them do that. And obviously it's bogged down with saying, well, I'm a teacher with 30 kids in my class. How am I supposed to do this making $35,000 a year? It's impossible. So it has to come from a higher level where we invest in the education system, which if you listen to George Carlin, we're never going to do. Because if we invest in the education system, then we make people able to actually make change in their life. But ideally, I think it's the people around you are those you can try to help advance, because a teacher can't do everything and a parent working 3 jobs can't do everything. But anybody you bring into your life, you say, hey, you're struggling with this. How can I help you? And that might mean, how can I help you by changing my own mindset to working with that? I work with actors, and every show I do and every actor I work with them differently. I learn them over time. I figure out what's working. I try a bunch of different things. But what I tell one actor is not the same way I'm going to treat another actor, because they function differently and they take the notes differently. And sometimes when I'm struggling an actor, I will say the same thing, but I will say it different ways. I will never try to keep saying it the same way, because I've realized that if I'm going to get something, if I'm going to help somebody through the problem, which is my job, if an actor's not doing a great job, either they're not putting in the hard work, which I can't help them with that. Effort is important. But if it's not the hard work, then I'm failing them somehow, and I have to figure out how can I empathetically find a way to get them to it. And not everyone's going to be the same. Not every person in your life, not every person you educate, not every person sitting next to you, whether older or younger, it does not matter, may know how to get there. And you can't tell them, because that's rude, because they're not the educator.
Right.
But you can have a conversation. You can use the Socratic method, and you can ask questions, and you can see if they lead themselves to it, as we've done. We just need to be a more empathetic society, whether towards our divergent, LGBT, people being normal. I mean, we just, we got to let normal people, we got to let them understand that life's okay, and they're going to get through life in our neurodivergent world, because clearly we're the majority, and those normal people are the minority who are different and weird, and we're okay with that, and we will accept you normal people in our world.
I love
I like that. And one thing that really caught my attention that you said is that you basically described that the responsibility for educating is not solely that of a teacher in school, and it doesn't end at the end of a traditional schooling. It's all of our responsibility as a society to contribute to that society and help others understand, because somebody at some point along the way helped you understand. And our job is to share that collective knowledge and contribute to society that way. And contributing to society doesn't just mean financially, like some people think. It means contributing thoughts and ideas, contributing feelings and experiences to people, and helping to grow your own community, your own society, by being an active contributor to that. And I think that was a really good point to make, is that you don't necessarily have to be a teacher. It's not your job, it's everybody's job, because it's all of our society together. You are part of it, and so you can't separate yourself from it when it's not your job, because you are an active part of it. All right, so with that being said, I think we've had a hell of a discussion about this today, and there's a lot for me to think about for sure. So thank you very much, everybody. Daniel Lee White, thank you very much for joining us. And my name is Aaron.
My name's Cass.
Hey, my name's Daniel.
This has been Fuck the Planet.